Welcome to episode 6 of Stayin Alive with me, Jesse Smith, a podcast about how to get creativity to pay the bills, how to monetize art, and how to turn doing what you love into a bunch of Benjamins. I hope you're all very well indeed. Last week I announced the re-release of my album Acoustic Anthems, and you guys have blown me away with the response. They've been flying off the shelves and there is less than 10 copies left. So if you'd like one of the very few remaining copies, please head over to jessesmithuk.com before it's too late. My guest on the pod today is a phenomenal musician, composer and songwriter, best known for being a founder member and keyboard player for Level 42. Level 42 are one of the most successful jazz funk outfits of all time, having released 11 studio albums to date and sold over 30 million units worldwide. He's a real gent and I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, so please welcome to the pod, the brilliant Mike Lindup. Coping up in Scotland in the lockdown?
Yeah, well, you know, it's if there was ever a beautiful place to get locked down in, it's here, for sure.
Whereabouts are you?
I'm on the West Coast.
Oh wow!
And kind of off the beaten track. And you know, although I'm near quite a lot of kind of historical sites. Being in the sort of kingdom of Dalriada, former kingdom of Dalriada, which is where the first Scots or Scotties came over from Northern Ireland years ago and created a kingdom here. You know, this place has been inhabited for, you know, over 5,000 years. And when I go for walks, you can see, you know, remnants of, either, you know, Dunad, as it were, which is where the first Scottish kings were crowned, and there's a special rock which has a place for a cup holder and a place for a foot for whoever it was that's being crowned to put their foot into, and it's on this sort of flat ground where you can see for miles, and it was fortified, and apparently the sea or the river used to come right up to it, so it was and they used to trade, and apparently they traded with, you know, Vikings and probably with the Picts and you know, and there's a lot of history, of course, we don't know, and that's always being uncovered even in these times. But yes, so it's a very historical area, but it's not kind of on the tourist map, and I'm on a peninsula which leads to a dead end, so people coming here are coming here. They're not sort of on their way to, you know, to Glasgow or to Fort William or to the Trossachs or to Stirling Castle or to any of those places.
Yeah, no one's popping in for a cuppa. They have to be coming.
Well, exactly. I mean, obviously, my neighbours, under normal circumstances, but I look out over a sea loch, which is gorgeous. And you know, when I go for my walk or my daily exercise, you know, I'm in beautiful countryside, so that's you know, good on many levels. Obviously it's good on a therapeutic level, you know, it's great being in nature, but it's also good in terms of the muse and sort of thinking about stuff and you know, getting ideas. I mean, you know, who knows where ideas come from and what triggers them, but certainly it helps to be here, and you know, I'm lucky because a lot of people are you know, in much more restricted circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just to say, we've started recording. I'm here with Mike Lindup. It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this, first of all. You're the fourth person I'm recording, and I'm really nervous about this, but I think it's going to be brilliant, actually, and to learn from people like yourself and the stories that you have over your career so far. And if we may, I'd like to go back to the beginning and talk about sort of your musical beginnings. So you come from quite a quite an amazing family in terms of the arts, don't you? I was doing my research last night, and your mother was an actress, and your father was a film composer. So can you just tell me about your upbringing and being in such a creative household?
Well, yeah, my mother was. She came to Scotland actually during the war. She volunteered when the call up went round all of the colonies and places like that, and she was in British Honduras at the time, which is now Belize, and she was 18, and the war had been on for a couple of years, and they were calling for people to volunteer and help fight the cause. So she came to the UK and wanted to be stationed in Scotland because there's quite a Scottish collection with Belize. Some of the early colonisers there were Scottish, and for whatever reason, she spent her war years mainly in Scotland, and then went back home and taught as a head teacher in a school right in the bush for a couple of years, and then came back to the UK in 51 and has been here ever since. And she studied at LSE for a year, and then she stopped because she'd started getting singing gigs at folk clubs because she's got a beautiful voice. And folk clubs, in those days, late 50s, early 60s, were very much kind of the open mic places that we sort of know of more now, where people from all over the world and with all different experiences, but with that sort of commonality of loving music. And maybe, mum grew up knowing a lot of British folk songs because it was a British colony. And, she grew up listening to American radio and jazz on that. But, folk included semi-religious songs and protest songs and bawdy songs, rude songs. And so she found herself kind of at home there, and she made a name for herself, and then got involved with a program on the radio called Hootenanny, which came from Scotland, where different folk singers would gather together, and then a TV program called Hallelujah, which was on every Sunday, and she was partnered with other singers and songwriters such as Sidney Carter, Martin Carthy, Isla Cameron, and they was very sort of big names in the day, and this was like national television. So she was singing and then doing gigs at the Edinburgh Festival, which is how I got my love of Scotland, because we'd spend summer holidays up travelling around Scotland, visiting friends and connections with mum, and then end up in Edinburgh for the week of her sort of singing engagement. And so at home, the sitting room had a piano and guitars and drums and a tape recorder, and she used to rehearse there, with accompanists, because she couldn't really play. She could strum a bit, but she couldn't really play guitar, so she often had an accompanist who was a proficient guitar player, and she'd sing around the house, and then my dad was a composer arranger, and he came out of the jazz scene, and he got a name for himself as a jazz arranger and orchestrator, and then got in worked for a long time with John Dankworth and Cleo Lane, and worked with John as his sort of co-arranger for many years, and then was doing TV themes and sort of incidental music and library music. Perhaps his most famous claim to fame was that he did the arrangements for the Muppet Show.
Wow!
So whenever so that was the Jack Parnell Orchestra was the band, but whenever there was a guest artist, whoever came on, and they would do a number with the Muppets sort of halfway through the show. They do their sort of singing thing with Kermit and Miss Piggy. So my dad would do the arrangements for that. And he'd do incidental music for things like the Persuaders and so on. Not the theme tune, but the music you hear as you're watching the program.
Sure, yeah.
And and he, unfortunately, my parents split up when I was quite young. But obviously, my dad kept on working, and I kept seeing him, and my mum was working. Then she kind of got more into the acting and played a nurse on a series called Angels, and was in a program called Crown Court, and did plays and did stage plays, and I sometimes travel with her to do that. So and there was a record player and a big record collection in the sitting room, and that's where I used to go and hang. That was my my playroom, my chill room, my escape room, and my creative room. So I started making up things or trying to figure out what I heard on the radio, on the piano, and that's kind of where it all started.
So it's just inevitable, really. You were just surrounded by the music and everything.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, of course, I wasn't thinking about anything like, a career. I went to school locally, primary school and middle school and 1 year at high school. And then I got into audition for a music school called Chetham's in Manchester when I was 14. And so I was accepted there and was at that school for 4 years, which was a specialist. All the people there were musicians or training in music. So we had an academic timetable, but the rest of the time we'd be doing private study lessons or orchestral rehearsals or choir, singing gigs in cathedrals and so on. And then
was that a boarding school?
Yes, it was. It's in Manchester. So
Right.
I was living in London. So in order to attend, I had to become a boarder. So I became
Right.
a boarder at the age of 14. And at first,
It's quite a task, isn't it, to be away from your folks when you're that age for 4 years? It's a long time, isn't it?
It was, and it took me a while to get used to it. I hated Manchester when I first got there. I thought it was the school is in the middle of the city, and understandably, it was restricted, so you couldn't just go out and do what you want. You had to get permission, and you had to go with someone else, and then you had to sign back in, and all kind of health and safety stuff, if you like. This was like 1973, 74. But when I got there, I looked around at the skyline and thought, this is just like London, but not as good. And I was lonely and I was fed up. And
You should have started going to Old Trafford, Mike. You would have been much more invigorated.
Well, what eventually, I soon realised that actually Manchester had a lot going for it, and one was the friendliness of the people, which was in stark contrast to London. Even though I'd lived in London all my life, and I grew up in Wimbledon, I noticed how everyone would say, "You're right, love," and they just seem really friendly. And so and then we'd have school trips, and we'd go out to the Lake District or the Peak District. And in groups, looking at the geology and geography and just going for walks. And then we'd go up to the Lune Valley up in Lancashire, which is a beautiful spot. We go to Heaton Park, which was a big park on the outskirts of Manchester. And I realised that there was a lot, going for it outside. And so when I went back after I'd left school, I always get a tingle when I get into Manchester. It means a lot to me, and then that area did so. And of course, from a musical point of view, it was fantastic training there, and it led me on to going to auditioning and getting into the Guildhall School of Music back in London afterwards for another 3 years of study, which is where I met eventually the other guys from Level 42.
Yeah, right. Was it Phil that you were at Guildhall with at the time?
Yeah, well, I was full-time there, and he was having part-time lessons with my percussion teacher, because by then I'd been encouraged at Chetham's to take up percussion as a study, because I'd gone there as a pianist and clarinetist and composition. And I dropped the clarinet while I was there. I wasn't enjoying that. But I took up percussion at the behest of the then music director, Jerry Littlewood, who seemed to think I'd be good at it. And actually, it was great. I really enjoyed playing percussion. And of course, what that meant was that I was playing in the orchestra suddenly, whereas as a piano player, you don't really get a chance to do that, which was great. I really enjoyed playing in orchestras and chamber orchestras and, everything from Bach to the most sort of, contemporary 20th century music, and big concerts at the Free Trade Hall, doing the Planet Suite and Belshazzar's Feast and all kinds of fantastic pieces. So when I auditioned for Guildhall and the other colleges, I auditioned as a first study percussionist, which meant my odds were much, I think shorter is the right word.
Yeah.
Because, there's no way I was going to get in as a pianist. There were far too many much more dedicated concert pianists around.
Was it really competitive, was it, to get in?
Well, there were only so many places. I mean, there were 4 colleges, really offering places: Royal College, the Academy, Trinity, and Guildhall. I auditioned for the Royal College, the Academy, and Guildhall because I didn't know, which one would accept me, but I figured, if I go for those 3, I stood a good chance. And actually, I got accepted into the Guildhall, and it turned out to be a blessing, because at the time, the Guildhall was the only college that was really kind of encouraging, even if it was in a semi-sense, any other music than classical. So
Right.
they had the drama department, and of course there were like theatrical productions that needed music. There were drama students who fancied themselves as singers that wanted to sort of, get backing. And there was a guy there called Dave Watts who used to run something called a pop workshop, where people could drop in and just try out stuff. We formed, some of us from that formed a dodgy cover band called Jawbone.
It's a good
where,
name.
where I thought it was a terrible name, but anyway, yeah, we had a couple of regular singers and a small brass section, and I was playing drums in it, and we did a few outside gigs, probably surreptitiously. So where I had friends from Cheatham's who went to the Royal College. There was a girl there, Jo Wells, who said, "Can I start a big band?" And she was told in no uncertain terms that wasn't going to be acceptable at all.
Right.
And in fact, Phil, who I'd met at the Guildhall, he then went to the academy and was studying there, and he got told off for putting together a drum kit in the percussion room with all of the bits and pieces,
Wow.
so it was really, it was really frowned on. And this is like the late 70s. We're talking, 77, 78. Whereas at Guildhall, it was much more encouraging, and it was a much freer atmosphere. So I'm glad I ended up there.
Yeah, it sounds like they're a bit more liberal. Yeah. So, okay, so you meet Phil, and then, of course, he eventually introduces you to Mark, is that right? And that's where Level 42 begins. So what were those early days like? How did you get together for the first time and rehearse and all that stuff?
Well, our first rehearsals were in fact jam sessions, and by the time, after I'd met Mark and then Boone, I think I met Mark. Actually, I met Mark first. Phil introduced me. We met at a Golden Egg Cafe in Oxford Street, and I just bought some Billy Cobham drumsticks. And
Right.
and we were all talking about drummers, because Mark was a drummer before he became a bass player. And
That's right, yeah.
and we go around to Phil's flat that he was sharing with Mark, and put on records and who's the best drummer, and listen to, jazz fusion and funk, and Mark went off on a couple of attempts to sort of, make his name in a group, one in Austria and one in Italy, and neither of those worked out. And eventually we kind of said, well, let's try something ourselves. And so I booked the percussion room at Guildhall as a rehearsal space, and Monday evenings we'd come in. And in fact, the first guitarist on the scene was Dominic Miller, who's now Sting's guitarist, but he was also studying at Guildhall, and he'd introduced himself to me by walking in the room one day with his electric guitar, plugging in, because there was an amp there, and saying, "Listen to this," and just playing this thing, which just was like, wow. Because he'd heard me playing drums, and he said, "Play along," and so when we sort of started, jamming together, it was me, Dominic, Phil, and Mark. And I think the next rehearsal we had, I think Boone came along with his guitar. So and then I think shortly after that, Dominic didn't show up, and so I don't remember why, but I think something to do with it was about the fact that there were too many guitarists in the room, perhaps. But we'd sort of got some bits of really instrumental riffs together, and I booked our first gig in the Student Union Bar, and we arrived to do the sound check, calling ourselves 88 because we hadn't decided on a name. And the day of the last rehearsal, Mark had suggested that we call ourselves 88 because he'd come in on an 88 bus, and thought it was a good thing, because we all argued about a name, because we didn't want anything that sounded pretentious, and we didn't want anything that would pin us down, and we couldn't agree on anything. But we had this gig coming up, so we had to be called something. So 88 it was. And so we're in the sound check in the Student Union Bar, which wasn't within the college. Student Union Bar was in a separate refectory where we used to go for lunch, and it was right in the middle of the Barbican Flats. And someone came in with the baby halfway through our sound check saying, bit of a racket, you're not going to, be doing that at night, are you, sort of thing. And no. So cut to the gig, we get to about a third number, and the Student Union leader comes hissing up to me saying, the police are upstairs, they've been called by the residents, you're going to have to turn right down, otherwise they're going to shut you down. Wow. So I think we maybe played one more number, and then that was it. We were told that was it. So
it was a bit of a stop-start beginning.
It was, I mean, you can imagine this incredible pent-up energy, and, Phil was not holding back. Mark never holds back. And so it was really exciting, but there were only about 4 tunes that actually got played.
Right.
So that was our inauspicious start.
I just wanted to ask you, before I forget, do you think the fact that you were all kind of drummers to begin with sort of helped form that kind of very rhythmic kind of jazz funk style that Level became? I mean, you said that all 3 of you were, drummers and percussionists, and do you think that had something to do with how rhythmic you were as a band?
Definitely. It definitely helped. And, apart from the fact that we're all into the similar kinds of music. I mean, we had differences between ourselves individually, but where we connected definitely was stuff like, Mahavishnu Orchestra and John McLaughlin and Return to Forever and Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock and Weather Report and also Stevie Wonder and James Brown, and Mark was a huge Cream fan. So there was that kind of, rock edge in it as well. But the rhythmic thing was definitely a huge, I think, benefit. We could lock into each other, pretty easily. And, that was always an important part, was the timing and the groove and, it being, as great, because we were, influenced and inspired by a lot of these fantastic artists who were just like masters. And so, like children, you hear something, you want to emulate it as exactly as you can. And, if it sounds like that, then that's how it should be. So
absolutely. But you were obviously all super proficient because, even at that age, you'd been trained, hadn't you? You'd done your 4 years and then you'd gone on to Guildhall. So you weren't kids just jamming. You all were proper musicians, so to speak.
Well, yeah, although from different schools of training. So, I mean, Mark and Boo never went to music college. I went to music school and music college, and Phil had some experience in music college. So there was definitely that. But, they'd had more experience because on the Isle of Wight before we met up, Phil and Mark knew each other as drummers, and Phil and Mark and Boone had sort of put a band together to play for a Save the Whale concert, and where I think Boone was on bass and Mark was on guitar or something like that. But yeah, I suppose we certainly had ideas, and we had some musical proficiency. I mean, it was quite rough and raw, but it was. I remember coming home and talking to my mum, being very excited after our first kind of rehearsal, saying, this is amazing. This is just like, we've got this amazing band. And she was trying to sort of, calm down, dear, don't get too excited. I can't remember what she said, but sort of like, just carry on with your studies, and
sure.
don't take it too seriously, and so on. But I mean, I knew we had something, but whether anyone else would get it was another matter. So it wasn't until we kind of released our first record and started getting feedback that we kind of thought, oh yeah, there is some other people do like us, do like what we're doing.
And when did you start to sort of really, really see the benefits of that? How long had you been sort of jamming together before you released that first record and started to get some notoriety?
Yeah, it all happened pretty quickly. I mean, I think we met in the last part, 79. And yeah, one of the things that happened is that Phil had been invited to play drums on the first M album. M was a group run by Robin Scott that had this huge hit single, Pop Music, in '79. And I think Phil actually appeared on Top of the Pops, although he didn't actually play on that record. He played on the remainder of the album, which was recorded in Mountain Studios near Montreux in Switzerland. And so with that experience, when it came to Robin doing his second album, Mark also was involved. And this is just as we're about to start recording our first album. And how that happened, that we got a record deal, because that's the first thing that happened. We hadn't even done any gigs. We hadn't made a demo tape. We were, fortunate because Phil and Boone's older brother, John, was working in promotions for EMI at the time. And Phil or Boone had told him, we got this group together, what can we do? Can you want to have a listen? Can we do something? And so through the generosity of Robin Scott, who paid for it, we booked a rehearsal studio in North London for 3 days. 2 days to practice up stuff, and the third day for a guy with an independent label who John, Phil's older brother, knew, came along to this rehearsal with his tape recorder, and he had his ear to the ground. He had a record shop as well as a record label in North London. He did some DJing along with another guy. He had a kind of jazz funk group, and he was looking for something to sort of fill or supply the market that was this jazz funk movement, which was kind of bubbling underground in the late 70s, early 80s, which was basically kids going to clubs wanting to dance to kind of quite sophisticated sort of, jazz funk music, which had a groove, which was danceable, but also, was sometimes instrumental. And they dress up a bit, and it infamously got into the sort of cliche of the slacks and the and the nice tops and the cortinas and the fairy dice and all of that sort of thing, coming from the home counties. But there was a big thing, and Andy listened to all of our jammings, because that's all they were, no songs. And there was this one particular jam that he really liked, and he said, if you can turn that into a song, I'll sign you to my little label to make a couple of singles and an album. So Mark and Boone duly went off, because it was Mark's music sequence that Andy liked, and together with Boone came up with the melody, and Boone wrote the words, and that became our first single, Love Meeting Love. And we recorded that at Gateway Studios in Streatham in March 1980, and it got released on Andy's Elite record label in May 1980. It got picked up by the jazz funk DJs, people like Robbie Vincent at the time and Chris Hill in the clubs. Got a lot of play, a lot of attention, got to 61 in the charts, got Polydor interested in then doing a distribution on the single, so they kind of reprinted it on their label. And then we went into the studio. I left college in July 1980. We went into the studio in August. We recorded what later came out as the Early Tapes album, which is our first recording album. It wasn't actually finished because we ran out of time and ran out of budget or something. And then Polydor at the beginning of 81 said, right, we think there's potential in this jazz funk thing. We're going to sign a couple of groups. They signed Shack Attack and they signed us. And they put us together with a different producer because they weren't keen on the sort of Early Tapes material. And so then we went into the studio in March 81 and recorded Love Games, which was the first single that got top 40, which got our first Top of the Pops. Recorded the rest of the album that summer, and then started to get, a few gigs in clubs. So that's really our story of how we got going. It's quite unusual compared to the sort of, I guess, the norm, and
the slogging it out in a van type way.
Exactly.
So you leave college and you're thinking, this is easy, this is brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wasn't even thinking this is easy. I was just kind of thinking what was going with the flow. But I mean, I didn't really know about how much of a slog there should be or could be or, ought to be. It was just, here was the opportunity. I mean, I knew we had some talent, so I knew that in some ways that we deserved a break, but I didn't know that we'd have any success with it. Like I say, it wasn't until Love Meeting Love was getting played, got put on Power Play on Luxembourg. Wow. Because John had a connection with one of the DJs there. And it was, who was it? Was it Roscoe? It was either Roscoe or Stuart Henry. Anyway, one of those DJs put it on Power. It's on Power Play for a week, which means, for those who don't know, Radio Luxembourg was this station that came from somewhere out in the channel, and it came on medium wave only, so it would sort of phase in and out. And I remember listening to it growing up, and they used to play great music. And when our record came on and I heard it on Radio Luxembourg for the first time, it's like, that is a surreal feeling to hear your music being played on a radio station that, all the great stuff that you've grown up over the years has been played on.
I can see the joy in your face even now. We're obviously doing this on Skype, and I can see how nice a memory that is for you.
It was like, pinching yourself moment, big time. So then we went in with this producer Mike Vernon. We recorded the Level 42 album in the summer of '81, and then we got our big break, which was that the Police and their manager Miles Copeland had approached John, who then became our manager, basically, Phil and Boone's older brother, to do 8 shows in Germany, opening for the Police. And so, of course, it was fantastic. And so we got our splitter van. We had our splitter van. A brand new Mercedes van, got it split up, put all the gear in the back, and drove down to Stuttgart for the first show. And the first show was a disaster.
In what way? Musically?
There was nothing on the posters or the tickets to say that the Police had a support group.
Right.
So... And we got there late because, first experience of driving in Europe and, having to get the ferry to Calais, then drive through, France and get to the border with Germany and then drive down to Stuttgart and find the way and not get lost. And this is, of course, before sat-nav and all of that.
Sure.
So we got there literally with about 10 minutes to assemble our gear, stick it on the stage, do a quick line check and then go off. And then the doors were open. And so the lights went down, half an hour later, and 8,000 screaming Germans
expecting Stuart
expecting the Police to come on stage. And then the lights went up and it wasn't the Police, it was this funny group wearing all these spangly clothes, playing this sort of, tinky-tonky jazz funk music so half of them started booing. Probably not half of them, but it felt like half of them started booing. They started throwing stuff on the stage. There were coins arriving on the stage, which, is not nice.
No.
Somebody had a firecracker and it landed in the crook of Mark's arm as he was playing the bass. We did our sort of 35 or half an hour set. We came off feeling terrible, feeling we'd acquitted ourselves really badly, obviously... not with any great confidence, with half the audience sort of not wanting us to go on. Went backstage, to sort of console ourselves. Sting popped his head in and said, sorry it didn't go so well for you lads, kind of thing. And then they went off stage, and of course the crowd screamed again, and the Police went on, and they were at like almost they were ascending to the height of their fame. They just released the Ghost in the Machine album. The single that was out at the time was I can't remember actually. It was every little thing she does with magic, was huge. But of course all the other hits were going down a bomb, and we had a meeting between ourselves and thought, well, we can't do another 7 nights of this. It's going to be horrible. So out of that, we made some decisions. One was to dump all the spangly clothes and just go on t-shirts and jeans. Two was we needed to get the audience on our side. So in order to do that, we had to learn how to try and reach a room of 8,000 people that have not come to see you and give them a good show. So that was fantastic training on the job.
Can we just touch on that? Because for any sort of young artists, like what would your advice be for supporting a big band like that? You know, because I'm sure you've got some advice.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's a fine line. You know that the audience. I mean, it's the same with playing festivals, even to this day. Although we do have a reputation now. But I mean, there are a lot of festival gigs which were like that, where people will not come to see you. They maybe come to see their favourite group that's not you. They maybe would say they're not into the sort of music that you play. So you have to acquit yourself. So I think the trick is obviously to try and rise to that. I mean, in a bit like someone's thrown down the gauntlet saying, all right, let's see how good you are. So you have to go out and prove it, and you have to have that kind of confidence to do so. At the same time, you don't want to be arrogant and think, well, we're fantastic, and if you don't get it, fuck you. Because, that could go the wrong way. So, you are there, to do a gig and, ostensibly to entertain people and introduce them to music that hopefully they might like, that you think is great, but they may not.
Absolutely.
So, but there's no point in being shy, and which, in the early days, especially when we were singing, we were so nervous about singing because we basically learnt on the job. And, we'd look anywhere except in the audience's eyes when we were singing and quickly push Mark to the front of the stage and get him to do a bass solo because that seemed to go down well. But, eventually, you do have to try and connect with people right at the back. And it's not a question of necessarily singing louder or making larger gestures, although that can be part of it. It's just trusting that what you're doing, will land somewhere in the audience, maybe connecting with someone that you see is kind of enjoying it, and not showing how afraid you are.
Absolutely.
Inside. So certainly some bravado, and using that adrenaline to sort of just really put it into the music and performance, and just sort of imagine just pushing it out there, and not trying to sort of keep it there and play and not play any mistakes and hope you like me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very similar to, I always talk about when I did Götterdämmerung, and I'm not sure how much you remember about that project, but it was this really heavy metal kind of film project that I was doing. And just walking out on stage, and sometimes we'd be playing metal festivals and people would just immediately get it, and they'd be, the devil horns would come out and there'd be a circle pit and it would be great. But then doing that kind of gig at Isle of Wight festival is very different. And I totally get what you're saying. You just have to be you, don't you, and do your thing and perform your heart out. And not show everybody how terrified you are, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you believe in yourself, even if you're nervous, it comes across. Authenticity is definitely translates. I think we've both been in situations where you've been in an audience watching someone, and you can tell if someone means it or believe in themselves. Even if they're nervous, even if they stumble over their words. If the music is inside them, you can tell. Or on the other hand, if someone is kind of like just not really there for the music, they just want to be loved, and if the audience isn't loving them, then there's the odd comment comes out or something. You pick up on that immediately as an audience. So you have to be authentic, and you have to be brave, and also, if you can, enjoy yourselves. I mean, it's definitely worth, if it's not going down well, then you look at the other guys in the band and you have a great time anyway, and that will sometimes, save the day.
Totally. mentioned your bandmates there. What was off stage like back in those days? Was it decadent? Obviously, there was a lot of temptation, especially when you got, to the height of your fame. There must have been temptations around, but you don't strike me as a band that were necessarily getting up to nonsense like Led Zeppelin or Motley Crue or anyone.
Well, I guess we did our own mild version. I mean, the first place that we were really huge, and it was almost like overnight, was because after those, the rest of the German dates with the Police, which went loads better from the second night, we got someone in the crew, I was going to say, a German guy to make an announcement before we came on, saying the Police had some friends that were going to play for not too long, and so
sorry.
Yeah, so the audience were prepared. They knew that there was going to be a support band, and we really sort of tried to sort of throw it out there. And Mark came up with this "Are you okay?" phrase, which he still uses, and it really worked. And a load of journalists who'd come to see the Police wanted to interview us after our second gig because they were really interested by the band. So, and on the way back from Germany, we did this one show at the Paradiso in Amsterdam, which had been organised by two DJs who were big fans of our first single, proper single, Love Games. And as a result of that gig and their plugging us, our first album, Level 42, went gold in Holland. It went top 5. We got invited back. We did loads of gigs. We became really famous in Holland before anywhere else. And still to this day, we play loads of gigs when we tour in Holland. But, Holland being Holland, guys would occasionally saunter backstage and say, "Hey guys, do you want some of this?"
Yeah.
And, so there was a bit of some of this going on, although I remember that one of the early gigs we did, and looking at a couple of the guys in the band and seeing that they were there but not there in their eyes, and going backstage and saying, if you're going to do that, I don't really want to play because it's horrible.
Yeah.
And
especially for a band like you guys, because like we were talking about earlier, you're a very musical band. It's not like you're the Libertines and you can go out there and just play your jangly guitar and sort of mumble your way through the tunes. You, like you said, you've got to have a certain cohesiveness to be able to play what you guys play, right?
It's a high concentration gig. It always is. And and I found even when I was at Guildhall playing in the dodgy cover band in the Student Union bar, that even half a cider and I'd lose slight coordination on my drumming. So right. I discovered at an early age that any kind of alcohol, and I wasn't, I was interested in the idea of maybe a bit of, drugs or, marijuana or spliff, but I didn't smoke. So that wasn't comfortable either. But more to the point, I found that I just got high with the experience.
Absolutely,
and so I didn't need anything else, and it didn't work for me to take anything. So that was never a temptation for me. It was for others at times, but it wasn't for me. But it never got to, you're not talking Fleetwood Mac or anything near that sort of level of dependency or over the topness. I guess the rest is kind of history with Level. I don't want to make this all about Level 42 because I want to speak about you and your career since, and obviously you're still playing Level to this day. But just want to touch upon in 1988, I believe, when you just recorded Staring at the Sun, you did this European tour and it culminated in 6 sellout shows at Wembley Arena. I've sung one song once at Wembley Arena for an event, and it was like one of the highlights of my whole career. So, was that the biggest run of shows you've done? And what was that like? You must have thought I've made it when you're doing 6 nights at Wembley Arena. Well, yes, and it's kind of we did a couple of runs. I think we did 3 runs. We after our first US support tour with Steve Winwood in '86, we came back and we did, I think, 2 nights, maybe 4 nights at Wembley, maybe 1 night, I can't remember. But we did that, and then we did another run of 6, as you say. We did a run of 8 at some stage.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, Wembley is fantastic. I mean, yes, I mean it. The thing is, it's almost more fantastic to look back, and there's a quite a well-known Live at Wembley video that we filmed in '87, which is kind of the band in its first iteration, probably at the height of its powers and success and so on. And I look back at that and I think, wow, 12,000 people in that arena all wanting to be there for you. It's an unbelievable feeling. However, in terms of doing the show, it was a lot of work because there were no in-ears then.
Sure.
We were working with wedges, and actually it was quite hard work to hear yourself properly because the audience were really loud, which was great on one level, but on the other hand, it was sometimes hard to hear yourself. And Mark would do this thing which I used to hate him for, which he'd get the audience to whistle at some point.
That's horrible.
And so they'd be putting their fingers in their mouths and they'd be whistling this, and and I'd go deaf. My ears would be ringing, and then it took all the top off. I couldn't hear sort of my voice clearly for the next 3 or 4 numbers, and we were very busy. We were doing a lot of promo, and there was a lot of our careers riding on where the single's going to chart midweek in which territory, and whizzing off to do interviews with people that had never heard of you and hadn't done any research. And I'm not trying to say that it was a terrible life. It wasn't. It was great, but often we didn't appreciate how good it was, and we come off stage and we'd be more often than not kind of talking about how shit the sound was on stage, and
right.
I made a couple of errors where I hit the wrong button, or the sequencer froze or something like that, and of course everyone was looking around, and that was like a huge disaster. It happened in one of the Prince's Trust concerts in front of Charles and Diana, our biggest single, Lessons in Love, and the wrong disc had been loaded into the emulator because I hadn't labelled it correctly.
Days.
And so we had to play Lessons in Love without the sequencer, which of course sounded terrible to us. And half-assed, and I was getting glared at, and so it was that was a sort of, maybe that was a kind of defense against being overwhelmed by just how kind of huge it was. But it was really huge. And I mean, later on we did a run of 15 nights at Hammersmith Odeon in 1990, which was another amazing run with Alan Holdsworth on guitar at that time, who was this incredible. He died recently, rest his soul, but amazing musician. So I mean, the thing is, I think when we were at the height, or different heights, there was some realization, but not a complete realization, and we didn't enjoy it anything like as much as we could have done. I don't think we took it for granted, because we knew the reason we were having success was, I mean, to a certain extent, a large extent was the songwriting, but it was also the fact that we had a record company that was behind us, because we were selling lots of records and they were making lots of money, so they were booking private jets for us to do this, and it was great. But I kind of wish that I'd been a bit more self-aware at the time. And nowadays when we're on stage, I think we probably enjoy ourselves much more than we did when it was all kind of like, all going off in the world fame stakes.
Sure. I guess it gives you a fresh perspective, doesn't it, looking back on those days, and still being lucky enough to go out and tour now, because you've still got a great dedicated following, haven't you? We
have, and up until the pandemic, this year is our 40th anniversary year, and we've been doing more and more. We did almost 20 festivals last summer in 2019, and we were set to do a whole bunch of gigs, and in fact the stock of the band as a live unit has been rising and rising. And, we played Canada for the first time in years last year. We played in Russia for the first time ever. We were due to go to Australia and New Zealand for the first time ever this year. So it seems as though, certainly as a live band, we've never been more popular or known. We did our first gigs in South America a couple of years ago, in Chile and Argentina, and the reception, there was so much love coming off the stage as we stepped on it. It was like people were crying, saying, "How have you waited 30 years to come and play for us? We've been wanting you." It was just extraordinary. And but I think now we have, we've got more appreciation for that. Certainly myself and Mark have than for when it was the early days. But, we were younger, and again, it was all, a lot to do with, our career was riding on it, and, we were, I don't know, it's just experience. We just didn't have the experience and the insight that maybe we have nowadays in terms of appreciating really, what we'd accomplished.
Sure. And I just want to touch upon as well, your solo record, Changes. I was listening to it last night, and there's a brilliant song on there called West Coast Man, which I love, by the way. But that, what made you do a solo record at the time? And was it material that you'd already written that wasn't right for Level, or did you completely write it for that record? And also, you worked with some amazing people on that. Obviously, Dominic Miller, who you still work with, and you had Pino on bass, right? Pino Palladino.
Yeah. And Manu Katché on drums.
Wow, what a great team. Yeah, can you just tell me about the process of making that record?
Yeah, it was we just finished that Staring at the Sun tour, and including those 6 nights at Wembley, and we'd gone off to Japan to do some dates, and we were supposed to go to the Far East, other places, and I think Australia. And for whatever reason, it didn't work out that we were going to be able to get there. So we cut the tour shorter than it would have been. I mean, it was still a long tour, but it was a shorter tour. And there was then a space of months with sort of nothing in the diary, because what would come next would be the next album, followed by the next tour, because it was kind of like album tour, album tour, album tour. And so there stretched ahead a series of months which wouldn't have anything, filling them in terms of engagements, either recording or live. And so I saw this as an opportunity to finally, if you like, do a solo album that I've been thinking about doing. And it was a mixture of some of the songs that I'd written over the years that I'd presented to the band that they turned down for whatever reason, that I thought, well, I'll do it myself then at some point. And so I got in my home studio towards the summer of '89 and started compiling and re-looking at those old ideas, and also comparing composing new ideas as well, and sort of making demos. And Polydor, the record company, said they were happy to support me, and so they gave me a recording budget. And I went and picked a producer, a guy called Callum Malcolm, who, again, it's a Scottish connection. And also a hi-fi connection. So I had a Lynn Sondek record deck, and I really, I really loved my hi-fi. And I'd been up to Scotland, and I got hold of the Lynn magazine, and there was this interview with Callum Malcolm, this producer engineer, who'd worked with Runrig and done the Blue Nile albums, and I think he'd also worked with Simple Minds and a lot of jazz artists as well, and worked for the Lynn record label. And he talked about his philosophy about getting, the best sound naturally that he could in the studio, so that you have less work to do, if you like, when it comes to sort of mixing it and compiling it. And I fancied that as a philosophy, and the fact
makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, and he had a studio in Scotland called Castle Sound, south of Edinburgh, and where he'd done a lot of these famous things. And so I approached him and played him my demos and said, would you fancy sort of helping me do this album? And he said he'd love to. So we did half the recording at Metropolis down in London.
Yeah.
And, I invited Dominic, and, I don't know if it's through Dominic, but probably because he'd formed a sort of group with Pino and Manu. So, and I knew about Pino anyway, and I thought, well, I want to do something different. I don't want Mark on to do the bass. It'd be nice to sort of work with another bass player and work with different musicians.
Sure.
So, luckily, Pino said yes, and Manu said yes, and, I had the budget to be able to sort of support that and to pay for, great studios. So we did half of it in London, and then we went up to Castle Sound and did the rest of the recording and most of the overdubs up there, and mixed it up there, and it was a real fulfillment for me of a lot of ideas that had been that just wouldn't go away, and I thought had validity, certainly in terms of my solo voice. And it was a chance for me to sing, because most people talk about Level 42, they say, oh yeah, you're the one that sings the high bits. Yeah. And a bit like, well, actually, I do more than that. Especially,
you sang solo on quite a lot of the stuff,
yeah.
didn't you? Yeah.
But that's the sort of the sort of cliche Mike Lindup. He plays keyboards and sings falsetto. So
Yeah.
it was a chance to sort of say, well, this is also what I do and what I can do. And
there's actually a lot of, if I remember correctly, the first track it's like a big a cappella vocal arrangement, isn't it? And so you obviously did, you obviously were focused on wanting to sing more, and it sounds amazing. I can all the harmonies and arrangements on that record. I really encourage people to go out and listen to it. It's all on YouTube. I managed to find it. So
yes, thank you. Well, that's really great. I mean, it's amazing it's on YouTube, because I think it's been deleted for quite a few years from Polydor, now Universal, but I'm looking into licensing it back, because I'm about halfway through, or 2/3 of the way through recording what I'm calling Changes 2, which is another full solo song album, and it feels like the successor to me to Changes, but coming from where I am now. But in the light of that, my publishers approached Universal. We were looking to sort of, maybe once I finished this new album, that I can also use it to sort of get Changes out again, because quite a few people have said, I can't get hold of it anywhere, and so, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to hearing it. So I just want to touch upon now, Mike, if I may, that obviously this podcast is called Stayin Alive, as I mentioned before.
Yes.
I guess people from the outside looking in, they think Mike Lindup's in Level 42, he must be a millionaire.
Yes.
And there's obviously been highs and lows of your career, and what have you done to maintain your career? Obviously, I mean, we met on Thriller Live, of course, which is a West End and touring production, and we were on tour together for 10 months, and so you've obviously branched out and worked with other things and other projects. And was that a necessity, or is it something that you wanted to do? And how have you managed to stay afloat all these years when Level might not have been touring?
Well, I've always been interested because of the background of my parents and, my musical upbringing, and also this kind of music I like. I've always liked a variety of different music. So it was particularly when Level 42, we kind of had a break after 1994. Things weren't going particularly well for us in terms of our relationship with the record company, and it was all getting a bit serious, and we thought, you know what, maybe we'll just have a bit of a sabbatical. We've done 15 years of albums and tours, and we can maybe just sit back and find out what else there is to life and do other projects. And so at that time I joined the London School of Samba. I was playing Brazilian percussion in the carnival for a couple of years. I joined a Uruguayan group that was run by a Uruguayan friend of mine that lives here in the UK, to do some shows, and did a couple of WOMAD festivals with them. I joined a Brazilian R&B group called Delata, touring their first album, which I wasn't on, but I was on a subsequent album, but playing that material again, which was a dream because I love Brazilian music since I heard Stan Getz and Desafinado when I was about 3. And so to sing backing vocals in Portuguese and to play Afro-Brazilian music with all of that percussion influence and those harmonies was a joy. So and really since then, Level 42, when I rejoined in 2006, Mark had already sort of rebooted it in 99, and without me, I wasn't really keen to join at that stage. And so there was another keyboard player and singer called Lyndon Connor, who was, if you like, filling in my role, which was kind of, strange. But on the other hand, it meant that the band was able to sort of go out and kind of sound like Level 42 in a lot of ways.
Were you just fed up of touring at that time? Is that what it was? Was it other reasons? Or?
No. I suppose it was more like I was just finding myself and enjoying doing other things, and I didn't feel that I wanted to, I just got married as well. I didn't feel like I wanted to stop everything and go, if you like, go back to doing the old hits and without there really being anything new or fresh about it, and so it sort of didn't attract me at that time. It's kind of like I'm enjoying this time out, I want it to continue. Sure. So I came to an arrangement with Mark where he got to use the name without me, and I was happy for him to do that. And so, and it wasn't really until the 25th anniversary in 2005 where Mark invited me to just come and guest and play the last part of the show at the Forum where they were playing. And, he kind of announced me on as a surprise guest to the audience, and the audience really kind of, went wild. And I really enjoyed playing with Mark again. It was like, we played last week. It was like, no time had passed, and we just clicked immediately. The chemistry was there. And shortly afterwards, Mark said, I'm recording a new album. Do you want to be a part of it? And I said, yes, I'd love to. And so that was the Retroglide album, which came out in 2006. And then Mark said, do you want to come on tour? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And so since then, we've sort of been back together on stage, and it was great coming back in that context of not just playing the old stuff but playing some new stuff at the same time, and of course having not played with Mark pretty much for about 12 years, it was there was kind of like a new appreciation of what it was that we had together, and so that continues and goes from strength to strength, which is great.
Yeah, well, we all appreciate it.
But you asked me something, and I've kind of wandered back to Level 42. But I think
that's okay. I was asking about sort of the I guess the bad times. How you've managed to stay afloat during those periods where Level 42 weren't touring, and because I really want this to be stories for people who are trying to make it and trying to forge their careers, and I just wondered if you got any.
Well, my advice is if you do manage to make £1 million, try and invest some of it, which is what I didn't do. So technically, yes, I was a millionaire in 1988 for a few months. And very rapidly afterwards, I became not a millionaire in more and more large proportions, because I disinvested my money in, some nice cars like a Ferrari. I bought a Ferrari, which I bought for a load of money, and then sold it in the recession for hardly anything. And, I bought a big house, which unfortunately didn't make any money, which is highly unusual, but just that my timing was really bad, so I sold it for the same price that I bought it for. 2 years later it's worth twice as much. I mean, this is just stuff that happens. But I'm not in a position where I can if you like, sit at home and just let the royalties roll in, and I have to work, most of my income comes from playing and performing, so that's of course gone out the window now with the pandemic. And I say this in the context of, a lot of people are ill, and a lot of people are losing loved ones, so I don't say it lightly. And I don't want to be complaining about the fact that the world owes me a living when people are dying. But one of the things that, if you like, doing so much touring as I have done over the years has helped with is you have to adapt to your situation, which may not be optimum, and try and be creative. So from carrying loads of heavy home recording stuff on tour with me and lugging up to the hotel room every night, so that I can sort of work on my demos and ideas. Of course, it's great nowadays. I say, sounding like an old person, which I am. I'm 61. Nowadays, you just need your iPhone, and you can, I mean, my iPhone's a bit like my recording Walkman. I used to carry a recording Walkman around with me, because whenever I get an idea, I'd want to capture it. And so I'd record a tape full of ideas over a series of weeks or months. And when the tape finished, I'd then, sit down and review it and listen back, and the ideas that I thought, had some potential, then I'd work on and try and, make them into something more substantial. So, I mean, that's still the case today. I mean, I'm getting new ideas, as well as working on existing stuff like the Changes 2 album I'm working on. But also, with the benefit of the internet, I can Skype with my, co-writers. I can work with my co-producers. We did a couple of rough mixes via Zoom the other day, which, is possible. Even though if the sound quality isn't great, at least you can, you get an idea, and then he can send it via Dropbox or something, and you can listen to it and then feedback. But there's new things to be discovered. The whole kind of YouTube and online streaming and live concerts. I mean, I watched the Together at Home stuff.
Me too, yeah.
Which some of which I really enjoyed.
Yeah. That's very diplomatic of you, Mike.
Yeah. Well, it's a hard thing, because we as artists are used to being able to present ourselves in the best light, sure. Literally, and when it's your dining room or your kitchen, and obviously some artists have amazing dining rooms or gardens or kitchens or whatever, but it's not optimum, and you haven't got the best sound and the best reverb on your mic and so on. But absolutely. You're doing it for a good cause, so that's kind of like what carries over. But I mean, the music is such a part of the fabric of life, that it's being constantly referred to and used by people all over the world in all kinds of different situations. It's so universal. I mean, just a simple thing as Radio 4, because I've got a telly up here, so I'm listening to the radio to get my news mostly. And, every day on the breakfast show at 2 minutes to 9, they feature either a musician or an actor or a poet or, someone who would have been performing, and to just do something. And it's been an amazing variety of things. And there was a guy playing harmonica today, really great harmonica. Wow. And just 2-minute excerpt, and it's like, wow. I'm sorry I can't remember his name, but there's been classical musicians playing, there have been poets reading, but the music thing, there've been, obviously people are sending gifts and memes and stuff, and most of them have got music on them. So I know there's a real demand for it, and I'm just trying to figure out my way of being able to contribute. I don't just want to, play stuff willy-nilly, as it were. because other people are doing so. I want to have some kind of a real purpose in it. I also want to be, working on the stuff that I want to present in its best light. So, I mean, there are different options out there, and I'm like everyone else, just exploring them whilst being, in the kind of in this lockdown situation, which of course will lift at some point, and people will come to gigs again. And I hope that we all have a real new appreciation of being able to stand next to each other and enjoy music, or be on stage and see people stand next to each other and enjoy music.
Definitely, Mike. And I've got a real appreciation for you today for doing this. Thank you so much. I'm not going to keep you too much longer because we've already been chatting for an hour and 10 minutes, actually.
Ah, great.
But before you do go, I've asked everyone so far that's come on the podcast to be involved in this section that I call One Night Only, and it's putting you on the spot. And basically, I'm asking you to basically pick either a supergroup or a five-a-side football team of your choice. Now, this means that you can either play a gig with whoever you like, living or dead, or you could play five-a-side football with anyone, living or dead. Are you into football?
Not as hugely as I know you are. I mean, I do have a team, Tottenham, but I'm a very kind of passive supporter. I think I've been to one game in my lifetime, but I have been to.
Did you
World
win?
Cup. Yes, we did win, fortunately. So that was good. My son was with me, who's an Arsenal supporter. So that was
right.
It was very important that we won. We weren't playing Arsenal though.
So you can honestly say you've got 100% win record as a fan. So.
Well, let's not talk about Tottenham's history too much. But I started supporting Spurs when I saw them on TV in black and white in late 60s, and they were playing Chelsea in some final, and all I knew was that the team that were wearing white were winning. And my mum's mum was living with us, and she said, you should be supporting Chelsea. We're in South London. Tottenham are a North London team. And I said, I'm supporting these winning guys who are wearing white. And so that's kind of where it started. And then, I started to find out more about the team and, who was in it and who used to be in it. And, of course, in the 70s, Tottenham went through a really magic spell. And some of their players played for the England World Cup team and all of that. So, and your team's your team, and even though, like I say, I'm not really knowledgeable about them, I don't follow all of the results, but they're my team, and I'm happy when I've heard they've won, and I'm sad when I've heard they've lost. But
sure,
that's it. And but I mean, I don't really play. I mean, I used to play at school, and in fact, Level 42, when we were recording the early tapes, where Andy was very structured about the recording sessions. We'd start at whatever it was, around 11 o'clock or midday, I think, and then we'd finish at 6 o'clock on the dot. One of his famous phrases was, "Okay, we've got 10 more minutes for this idea." And, and at 6 o'clock we'd stop, and we were recording at Hillside Studios in Herne Hill, back of Brixton, and Mark and I were sharing a flat in Tooting, and Phil was living in Balham with John, his brother, and Boone was living there sometimes too. So we'd go to sort of Tooting Beck Common and do like a three-a-side or whatever it was, however many of us there were. So, I mean, I enjoy playing football, but I'm not very good at it. I have had a go at a few five-a-side teams with some of the school dads when Angelo, my son, was at his primary school. I'm never really very, very good at it, but, it's good fun. But if I was to choose between a football team, an amazing football team and a supergroup, I'd have to choose the supergroup, because I'd always be the weakest link in the team, whereas in a supergroup I stood more of a chance of making an equal contribution.
Yeah,
So,
I was going to say, just because you've actually played with two of the Beatles, haven't you? Speaking of supergroups. And,
yes, I
and
have.
I think Eric Clapton was on stage, and
Yes.
that was an amazing concert. So I just wondered whether you might opt for the football team, just because you've basically peaked anyway.
Well, I mean, there are still people I'd love to play with. I mean, if I was to pick a supergroup, I would probably I'd have Miles Davis on trumpet.
Wow.
I'd have Stevie Wonder on keyboards and vocals. I'd have probably John McLaughlin on guitar, because he's been such a huge inspiration. I would have, let's see, who would I have on bass? That's hard because Mark is obviously such a great bass player and such a big part of my life. I think I would go for someone unusual though. Who do I like? I probably, it's really difficult with bass players, but I'd go for somebody like Dave Holland.
Wow, yeah.
Because just because of his musicianship, not necessarily because of, he's a virtuoso bass player in that sense that he stands out, but just, you just kind of know that what he'd do would be the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, let's see, who would I have on backing vocals? Michael McDonald and Chaka Khan, let's say.
Wow, that is a gig I'd love to see.
I don't know what we play. I'd have our old tour manager, or one of our old tour managers. I'd have either Roger Searle or Kevin Hopgood, because they're both incredibly professional, experienced. I mean, Roger Searle, he tour managed us in the 80s when it was all big, and he was completely unflappable. And one of the reasons he was so unflappable was because he used to tour manage The Who in their wild days.
Right.
So you can imagine anyone that can come out of that and deal with that situation, then, someone complaining that his PDs are not enough is easy meat. So, but I'd have either Roger or Kevin as tour and stage manager, because they could help manage the egos and any of those other things.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, thank you so much for doing this. It's been such a pleasure to catch up with you, and stay safe in the chaos that we're ensued in at the moment.
Thank you. You too, Jesse.
All right, Mike, take care. So there we have it. How lucky am I to get to chat with all these brilliant people. I really hope you enjoyed my chat with Mike. It's been such a privilege to get to know and work with him over the last few years. For more information about Mike and his upcoming album, visit mikelindup.com or just bloody Google Level 42. My guest next week is something a little different. My first non-musician, which is really exciting. You'll probably have seen him on your TV as DC Jake Collier in Unforgotten, or in the brand new HBO series I May Destroy You, alongside Michaela Cole. So make sure you tune in to hear my chat with actor Lewis Reeves. If you're enjoying the pod, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review, as it really helps other people to find the pod. Or you can head over to jessysmithuk.com and donate a couple of quid to help me keep bringing you these conversations. This was a Jesse Smith production. Music by Neil X, Mark Garfield, and me. Thanks for listening. Take care of each other, and until next week, try and stay alive.